I want to tell you first kind of what we're going to do here. So we're going to break this into 4 sections. First, we're going to look at some statistics about what is happening with mental health, specifically with young adults, a little bit with adolescents. Then we're going to talk about why this is happening, and hopefully you can share also some of the data or maybe some of the anecdotes or impressions you have when it comes to young adult mental health. And then we're going to get into how gap years can help, which is in so many ways the most exciting part of this. And finally, where we can improve. So those are the 4 pieces of our conversation today. So let's get going. So there's a lot of data out there on young adults or in mental health. Everybody knows it's getting a lot of attention these days. And so one of the difficulties when I was looking at the data is that a lot of data is either from 2019, before the pandemic, or from 2020 or 2021. And so it's difficult to get a sense of data that isn't, I guess, doesn't have that noise, I guess, of the pandemic, where everybody knows it was very difficult for people. So I specifically used the mental state of the world data. And by the way, there will be a QR with resources later, so if you don't want to look into those reports, you can as well. But the mental state of the world goes out every year. And so this one just came out in March 2023 with data from 2022. So at least we have something that's fresh enough. But the data from 2022 and 2021 is very similar, which means that whatever effect the pandemic had on young adults, it's still there, and it hasn't changed. So this one in particular is very interesting because it tells us basically the difference between young adult mental health and people that are around their parents' age, so 55 to 65 years old. And so basically, young adults are struggling with mental health 3 or 4 times more than people in that other age range. And this is across the world. As you can see, there's different regions there. And it's the worst out of every section of the population is young adults. This one's very interesting because it compares, even though it's not the same research, it compares the state of mental health in young adults from 2008 with 2021. So if you look at this one over here, in 2008, young adults had about, some of the best levels of mental well-being, and now it's the worst. So in a matter of 13 years, young adults went from doing pretty good to doing really poorly in comparison to other populations. So the bottom bar here is very interesting. This is how the mental state of the world, this is mental health IQ score, or quotient, mental health quotient score. This is how they divide the spectrum of well-being, from distress to struggling, enduring, managing, succeeding, and thriving. And these are the numbers for young adults right now. So what I want us to focus on right now is in this 37%. Clearly, there's, this 44% is really important. There are maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 programs that are represented in the gap year field that focus on the struggling, the bridge being one, the one I dedicate most of my time to, and I know there's a few others that are represented here. But the gap year field as a whole has a lot of influence in this one, is my perspective. And this is where we stand to prevent a lot of issues, because people that are in the enduring and managing category have between 3 and 5 times more chances of becoming depressed than those that are succeeding or thriving, right? Another really important need for humans has been predictability. control, right? We've always wanted to control our environment, control fire, control, bacteria, control, right? And so that we want to make our environment as predictable as possible to reduce uncertainty. Uncertainty is the mother of anxiety, right? So it's possible that we've become so good at predicting our environment that just like we've become so good at feeding ourselves, that now we're beginning to see issues with our ability to predict the environment. Then people are more anxious because they don't know how to deal with uncertainty, right? So the more predictable the environment becomes, then the more you don't know how to deal with it, right? The point is that people are spending less and less time out in the world. And it's not like those needs have gone away, right? People still want to go on dates. They still want to avoid their problems. It's just that we're finding ways to satisfy those needs without having to go out in the world and get them. The better we become at satisfying certain needs without having to go out and look for them, the more we don't have to work with the world to actually go get those needs met. And that is my hypothesis as to why we're seeing a lot of these issues. A perfect contingency is when your action is completely sort of enmeshed in the response, right? So you go to the supermarket and voila, it's right there. When you go hunting, you don't really know what's going to happen. So you have to play around with the environment around you to see what's going to happen. The reason I have the Amazon pantry there, and I've never really used it, but what I imagine is that, well, you don't even need to go to the supermarket. You don't even need to negotiate with a person that's giving you the food, right? And so what you're doing is you're removing all the variables. You don't need to deal with them. And so we're advancing more and more with these what's called manufactured realities, so that you're not really dealing with the environment around you for whatever it is. And that's the intention that I think is really important to bring to the gap year field, right? Is that people are they're making the choice to go out to the unknown. They're making the choice to go out to uncertainty, to get something, right? And that's that mental fitness. What I fear is that the world of people, the young adults that are struggling, is a world that readily meets my needs, that agrees with me, and that tells me how to be, right? Because in some ways that's nice, it meets a lot of needs, but what happens when it doesn't, right? What happens when the world doesn't readily meet my needs? What happens when the world doesn't like what I have to say, right? And that we're living in a world with a lot of issues with regards to that, right? That's called tribalism. That's called echo chambers, right? When people say something that you don't like and you're not willing to have a conversation about it, right? Or a world where you don't know exactly how to be because you've been told how to be, and that's okay and that's comfortable. We're going to listen to Maddie. I love this video. She's so perfect.
Back to the rocks, definitely learned that we are capable of more than we think we are. And traditionally in the States, to do that type of job, we would have had the rocks dropped right next to the site, or we would have had a bobcat bring down the rocks. But everything is by your hands here and person in person. So it was kind of like a mental blocker that I was like, oh no, we're gonna bring the rocks down, no way. And then all of us did it, and we moved that big rock with a big rope, and then all of us together, teamwork. So kind of just learning to continue to push those blockades and kind of knock them down, because you can do it. Sometimes you might just have the mental block.
She said it. She got confidence from doing something herself with her hands, right? Instead of having the bobcat bring everything down. But that's what she expected. She got there and she's like, oh, I'm here for the selfie with the indigenous tribe of Costa Rica, right? Like, not necessarily to do the work, right? So I thought that was cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 elements that I believe are closely related to what the gap year field can offer in terms of what we can call mental fitness, to reverse the effect of the perfect contingency, right? So here's Edward.
Cool, because I'm usually a pretty adaptable person, but being able to be actually in new environments and being around different people, it really helped me, I guess, not really fear so much about what I'm around or who I'm around or anything like that, and just being able to just accept the world for the way it is and be a part of it.
So I looked at the GYA research, the 2020 survey report, and they had like 10 factors, I guess top factors or outcomes that people were getting out of their programs. And flexibility was number 6 and problem solving was number 4. So clearly people are getting these kinds of benefits from these kinds of experiences. There's numerous fields or approaches in psychology that speak specifically about adaptability. One of the more famous ones these days is acceptance and commitment therapy. And their basic word or I guess goal is psychological flexibility. And so clearly the fact that our student participants are getting a lot of adaptability based on what Edward said, your story, and the thousands of other stories that I know are there, tells us that this is happening without going there and sitting in a therapy room, right? Okay, next one. This is from a group of alumni that we took to South Africa. I love these videos. So smart, such smart people.
In a different place has also sort of affirmed for me the truth that there really is no one right way of living, and that the way that I was living and functioning, in the States is not necessarily the way it has to be or should be.
My first semester in college, I was rooming with a person from China, and I feel like if I didn't, immerse myself in a different culture, a lot of things that he did and how he behaved and lived with me, I would have taken a lot differently. I wouldn't have accepted it as much. So just, I think what it really did to me was just understand that my way is not always the way.
Because a lot of the time you hear on the news, things are happening someplace in the world and you just go, why would that ever make sense? And when you get get your head wrapped around the idea that people's minds work differently in different places, things start to make a little bit more sense and the world starts to make more sense. Even if the idea still doesn't make sense to you, you have a better idea that people think differently and you have a better acceptance of people and ideas that way. Yeah.
I like the concept of integrative complexity. It's not a very common concept. I don't know why. I really like it. The degree to which thinking and reasoning involve the recognition and integration of multiple perspectives. Again, I think that there's a good reason why people in Silicon Valley have created technologies that agree with us, because it just feels nice, right? But it's not how things work. And so to be able to tolerate and embrace and love difference is very important. And that's something that a lot of our participants get. In fact, I would say that everybody gets. Number 1, cultural awareness. Number 2, communication. So if there's something that we know these participants are getting, is that idea. I love what Kenton said. I've just always loved it. The fact that my truth is not always the truth. Man, that is something that can carry you a very long way. People with high integrative thinking, integrative complexity, have more divergent thinking and make more accommodative leaps. When people are stuck, again, just coming from the world of psychology, when people are stuck in their own ways of thinking, that's called repetition compulsion psychoanalysis, right? People become rigid and just do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And you know what everybody says about that, right? That's madness, right? And so, in so many ways, the fact that we're providing our participants with the opportunity to come out of madness, to realize that my truth is not always the truth, is a very, very important element for mental fitness. Okay, here's the last one I want to show you from Jack.
The culture that I was able to experience, having my worldview just completely blown open and expanded. To understand what it meant to develop my own opinions and thoughts and experiences.
The sense that I get is that historically, the students that have gone on gap years are the thriving and succeeding, that 19%. That, of course, is becoming less and less. And that one of the potential takeaways from this conversation is that the enduring and managing are probably the ones that need it the most, right? The richer get richer, right? The succeeding and thriving just get even more so, right? But providing the opportunities for those that are, learning to get around in the world might be the ones that actually can, travel sort of a longer distance in the journey, in a way. So in the gap year research, in the survey report, self-direction and lifelong learning are number 3 and 5. But there is a strong negative correlation between a strong identity and depression and anxiety. People with strong sense of identity are much, much less prone to depression and anxiety. So those are the 3 pieces that I wanted to show you that I believe gap years contribute strongly just by design. It's not this program does it, this program does it, this program does it. It's that it's just what happens. And I don't know if we're as intentional with it. And we actually reflect on those moments. Tell me what's been uncomfortable. Tell me where we've pushed that edge of the comfort zone, right? What have you learned from other people that you maybe initially disagreed with, right? That we intentionally create those kinds of situations. We're going to talk about some ways in which we can do that. But one thing I didn't put on here, and I'll speak about the sandbox in a moment, is on that report, there was some results from AmeriCorps. And so their top 3 outcomes were adapting to new situations, responding to unexpected challenges, and working with people different from myself. So we're seeing that across the board in these kinds of experiences that we're exposing students to. One thing that's really important about identity development, according to the theory, is, if we want to generalize, 2 steps: exploration and commitment. And so I recently did this set of conversations with students that have been through one of my programs, and one of the students said, the bridge is like a sandbox for law seekers. And I was like, I'm using that. That's mine. But I just think that, again, I am speaking about the program that I know best, but I think that concept of sandbox is really cool. I just thought that was extremely brilliant, because the sandbox does have some parameters, right? It's not nothing, but it's also not this video game where only some things can happen. There's room for exploration, creativity, for you to make it your own, but it provides that place of exploration where then commitment can come from. So what is important from my perspective that we can improve upon is to understand who's a struggling student, who's, I would say, languishing, right? That, just to say that category of like the managing and enduring, and who is succeeding and thriving. If we know that, then we can create programs or programming that focuses on that. Supportive immersion is a concept that we use, but it's just a term that we've given to the kind of education that I think is important. And it's basically the concept of the zone of proximal development, which we all understand from experiential education and so on and so forth. So if we create a situation where it's just so easy, it's that perfect contingency where like you're going to get it, then it's not going to make a difference, right? And if it's so far away from their confidence, from their capabilities, then it's not going to do anything either, right? So creating programming where people are at the edge of their comfort zone, at the edge of their capabilities is really important. So again, preaching to the choir here, just, you know, I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. If we know that adaptability, integrative complexity, and identity development are important, then how do we design programs where that's happening at a threshold of optimal growth for the participants, right? And then how do we train the guides and the staff that work in our programs to be able to facilitate that in simple ways? Because again, we're not talking about people becoming clinicians. We're talking about people being trained in mental fitness or in personal growth. And I believe that to be completely possible if we frame it in a particular way. And finally, education. I saw a lot of people writing down Loris Santos. Great. I teach a course at a university in Costa Rica for study abroad students, and it's called Sustainable Lifestyles. And basically, it's sort of a Loris Santos idea, but a lot more practical, and it's just teaching a lot about different dimensions of healthy living, right? What kind of education, psychoeducation, are we providing our students on what it means to live well? And I think that's also really possible without having to be a clinician. And so that's another piece that's really important. So finally, I want to return to that little doodle thing and conclude that we're providing the gift of experience to our participants, and that's the power, I think, that the gap year field has, and I think it's really important that we sort of maximize it, right? That we potentiate it. So.